Okay, does that little flashing red light mean we're live now and we're being recorded?
Sure looks like it. So everyone watch what you're saying. Full disclosure, you are now being broadcast over Facebook and you're being recorded to my computer right now.
And if you're not part of the presentation group, if you would mute yourself, we would greatly appreciate it because that does improve our sound quality. Okay, welcome everybody to Northwest Indiana Green Drinks. And we're so excited to have you, all of you actually, join us from your homes. And the invitation was genuine. If you want to grab some delicious eats or a refreshing libation in your home, you're welcome to do that. Just realize you are being video recorded. So I also want to thank our co-hosts and sponsors. So I have to acknowledge 219 Green Connect, who supplies us with our supportive platform for MailChimp and Facebook and those other places that we show up on social media. Also, I want to acknowledge Save the Dunes, not only because they are our presenters this evening, but they've also officially come on board as a co-sponsor of Northwest Indiana Green Drinks, beginning with this meeting. So Natalie, welcome, and Katie, welcome, and thank you so very much for joining us in this venture together as a full partner. And I want to acknowledge you've always been a partner with what we're doing. Also, another supporter of these Green Drinks offerings is the Michigan City Sustainability Commission. So I want to acknowledge their participation and support also. And it seems like I'm forgetting somebody, but I don't know who it is, and maybe I'll remember by the end. So without further ado, I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing Natalie Johnson, because I think everybody knows she's executive director of Save the Dunes, and in some way, shape, or form, you've had a touch point with her over the last several years. And also Katie Hobgood, she's the, oh my goodness, something manager, director. You're a director with Save the Dunes. And Katie's been with us, she was with us last year, I think, during our presentation. And I'm just going to hand it over to Natalie and Katie right away. We've had a very exciting week at Great Lake Days. And I put an S at the end of that for a reason. Usually we're in DC for only one day, seeing our senators and representatives. But this year it's spread over 3 days. And they're going to talk about some of the things we've done in the past. And I know Katie was with me this week speaking to our 2 senators and some of our congressmen. So without further ado, Natalie and Katie, and I'm here if you need my help, but I'm not here in an official capacity.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I will say, since I have this up, Nancy, Katie, if anybody comes into the meeting, you might need to let them in. But I'm just going to start talking. And if I see some, hands waving, then I'll know to stop and maybe look back on a technical, on the technical side of things. But hey, how's everybody doing tonight? Some thumbs up? You're feeling great? Maybe you're just hanging in there. Hopefully we're not seeing any thumbs down. Lots of thumbs up. Lots of thumbs going everywhere. Well, excellent. Thank you so much for having me tonight. Like Nancy said, I'm executive director of Save the Dunes. I've been in this role for 4 years and love this position, love the dunes, love getting to work with so many of you on protecting just what is such a very, very special place. And certainly one of the ways that we protect is through our Great Lakes advocacy. And that's what we're talking about tonight, because yes, Great Lakes Day, or now in this case, Great Lakes Days, since we're doing everything virtual, that's really the topic of tonight's conversation. But real quickly, for those who maybe are getting a little bit acquainted with Save the Dunes, just to remind you, our mission is to preserve, protect, and restore the Indiana dunes and all natural resources that connect to our beloved Lake Michigan. And as far as the programmatic work we do, well, we holistically protect the dunes. Think those meaningful conservation projects, community engagement, and then of course, advocacy. And I think that's what people know us best for. If we go all the way back to 1952, when we were created at a kitchen table in Ogden Dunes, we were known for being a group that speak out for the resources that may not be able to speak up themselves. And wouldn't you know that 69 years later, that's what we're doing today. And so understanding a little bit our role in Great Lakes advocacy is one of tonight's objectives. But I also want to have the opportunity to talk to you about those priorities. So we say we protect the Great Lakes, we carry this message, but what are we talking to our congressional leadership about? I hope to dive into that this evening. And then I don't want to do all the talking tonight. We've got some people who have participated in Great Lakes Days in the past and the present. And hopefully you are interested in joining us in the future. So tonight you're going to walk away with a whole wealth of knowledge as far as the priorities, what Great Lakes Day is, and how you might be able to get involved and become an advocate for Great Lakes initiatives too. How does that sound? Just trying to get the enthusiasm there. I think if people knew that I was in front, I would be woo, 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 trying to get everybody excited and energized. All righty, well, as far as Save the Dunes' role in advocacy, it's important to do things collaboratively. We can't just do everything in a silo. If you work together, you can certainly elevate your voice bigger and louder. And when it comes to Great Lakes advocacy, a lot of our messaging on the Great Lakes comes through the Healing Our Waters Great Lakes Coalition. Now, this coalition's message is to secure a sustainable Great Lakes restoration plans and the federal funding to implement it. So you have over 165 non-governmental organizations who have this common goal to restore and protect the Great Lakes. And of course, to Save the Dunes, we're saving dunes, but why are the dunes here? Well, they're here because of safety. So it's very important to us that we're talking about the Great Lakes and that we are part of these conversations and certainly advocating on their behalf. The event that everyone talks about as far as this coalition, the main event that everybody looks forward to each year is most definitely Great Lakes Day. So you have throughout the year the coalition coming together and identifying really what those main things that we need to convey, those main messages that need to be conveyed to congressional leaders to make sure that that's in the president's budget in order to support the Great Lakes. And then after a lot of talking and really figuring out what the best messages are, you have this one day, usually about the first week in March, where hundreds of advocates across the Great Lakes states join up as a team and go out to DC to then lobby our congressional leaders directly and say, this is what we need in order to protect the Great Lakes. Now, for the past 10 years, Save the Dunes has been forming Indiana's team and bringing them out to DC. But, we've really started to integrate more and more community members when we go out to DC and when we have these conversations. And why is that? Well, an expert, someone like the staff at Save the Dunes, well, we could go out there and we could say, you need to do this to protect the Great Lakes, and this is the amount of money that it takes to protect the Great Lakes. Well, we could say that message until we're blue in the face. But these congressional leaders, we cannot forget that they work for you. They want to hear from their constituents. They want to hear why. They want that motivating, why is it that we do this for the Great Lakes? Why is it so important? Is it something important to our constituents? And so our team that has been going to DC, and this year going to DC behind a computer, by way of a computer, we have been bringing together community members to help really hit home on that why it is what we do, and tell the stories so that our congressional leaders know that it's not just Protect the Great Lakes for the health of the environment, but protect it for the people that live, work, and play and really thrive because of these resources. So that is those messages. You know, we've got our team, and Katie has been leading our team this year. And we have had teams for probably the past decade now go out to DC and carry these messages. And I think maybe starting with, you know, what are those messages? I'd like to walk through this year's priorities. You know, I say that we're talking to congressional leaders this week. I mean, Nancy and Katie, they have been behind the computer and they've been meeting with our senators and our representatives. What are they saying? Well, let's talk about those priorities. So first and foremost, Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. I think this is one that if you haven't heard it by now, wow, you've managed to dodge that one, because that is something that we talk about over and over and over. It is a key funding source that enhances existing programs, and it's out there being used to clean up toxic sediment, combat invasive species, and really improve a lot of habitat. We'll get into about what that is and why it's important to keep not only those programs, but the other ones that exist through the federal agencies as well. Other priorities includes water infrastructure. We want to make sure that CSOs, combined sewer overflows, when the sewage goes out into the water, closes our beaches, that's not happening. We also want to make sure that crises like Flint, they're not happening over and over. And we know that that's definitely a risk across our Great Lakes region in particular. Certainly, there's other ways to strengthen our clean water protection, and that's part of the messaging. And then protecting safe, affordable, and water for all during the COVID health crisis. So those are the 4 priorities that over the course of the last year, the coalition came together and said for fiscal year, and we're actually talking, it's the 2021 priorities, but it's for the fiscal year 2020 or 2022 budget. Lots of twos in there. So let's break this down and talk about these messages. And you know what? Yes, I'm going to be giving you kind of the inside scoop on the messages. If you're interested in learning more, just make a note that, you know, virtual coffee or a beer, I'm up for talking about these priorities in more detail. But when we get to the end of this conversation and we say, all right, we want you to come advocate with us, just know it's not going to involve a pop quiz about these priorities. You don't have to be an expert on these things, but it is important to know a little bit of the background and what we're doing. So starting with that Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is responsible for that beautiful background that can be seen behind our program director, Katie there. Katie, go ahead and do the little wave so that people are looking at your screen there. The Vanna White.
Hello. Look at it. Isn't it gorgeous?
You know, it's a funding source that was founded under the Obama administration. It's stuck around. It has been slated to be taken off over and over again, to be cut out, but has successfully been riding at about that $300 million level each year. And during a 2018 analysis, when some folks were really looking at, well, okay, if you're taking and making an investment in the Great Lakes, what's the return on that? Well, it turns out that it's a 3-to-1 return on the investment in local communities through new real estate, commercial development, resurgence of water-based recreation, tourism, housing options, home values. Why? Because this money is being used, I mentioned contaminated sediment removal, restoring wildlife habitat, stopping invasive species, controlling agricultural runoff, creating beautiful pollinator habitat like that I just pointed out in Katie's background. It's all about taking these areas that maybe they weren't destinations, or maybe they weren't the most prettiest places to live, re-energizing them, reinvigorating them. And that return is so much more than just the habitat improvements and the health of the water, but it really is this social and economic boom that happens as a result. So Nancy and Katie, they've been out there, they've been taking this message. Todd's been out there with us before and he's taken this message. And since we've seen such a successful return on Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which is used to enhance existing programs out there, it just made sense to elevate it and ask for $375 million in the budget. Not only, I mentioned about, of course, this is the power of helping the environment, but I mentioned the people. Not only is it so good for the environment, if we think about the people who are most harmed by pollution, it's often people of color, low-income communities, indigenous populations. Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is also one of those funding sources that is known to really help address some of that environmental injustice that lies out there. So we look at this, we see this as really a pillar for our messaging. We know it works. We know the dollar amount that's going to be successful. We know that this is a reasonable ask to our congressional leaders, and it's something that we are happy to take with us and message on each and every year. The next thing up is talking about enacting comprehensive water infrastructure legislation and increasing the funding and support for drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. So did you know that we have a lot of people, and when I say a lot of people, 30 million people who depend on the Great Lakes for drinking water. 30 million people. But that's 30 million people who also are facing threats from lead contamination. And I mentioned combined sewer overflows because, oh yes, we have outdated infrastructure and the storm sewers all combined into one during a heavy rain, releasing that sewage right out into our waters. And all of this outdated infrastructure, I know some people are very quick to go, oh my gosh, why aren't we doing anything about it? So often our municipalities can't afford to make those changes overnight. It's very, very costly. In fact, if we talk about how much is needed as far as drinking water and wastewater improvements, the price tag is about $188 billion. So it's something that people, we can't pass the hat, we can't reach in our pockets, but through the federal budget, we can put in money for what's known as the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program. This is a loan program, a low interest loans. Communities are able to tap into that loan and use those monies to redo a lot of their infrastructure upgrades. So we see this as really a way to take down that price tag barrier that seems to be such a sticking point for so many of our communities, and really giving them the opportunity to get our clean water back on track. A little bit of music there. So restore and strengthen clean water protections. That's another one that comes up. And basically, this one's talking a lot about legacy pollutions and the things that whenever we look at or hear about our federal government possibly rolling back definitions of wetlands or talking about lessening the protections within the Clean Water Act, we need to stand for that. And so in general, a main message that is also being taken to DC and constantly being elevated is we need more protections for clean water, not less. It's a very easy thing to communicate and one that we like to remind people, because we also like to remind our congressional leaders that climate change, it's a thing. And yes, while we need to continue to protect our clean water just for the sake and the state that it is in now, we're going to have a lot of new challenges as our climate changes year after year. And last but not least, that fourth priority that's being taken to DC this year is protecting access to safe, affordable water for all during the COVID-19 health crisis. Now you might be wondering, well, what's going on as far as water when we're talking about COVID? Well, if you think about this, just within the last year, there's been people who have had their water shut off. Maybe they weren't able to work because of the pandemic. They're not making the income that they normally would have. They're having their water shut off, and a nationwide estimate actually says about 15 million Americans experienced a water shut off. And that's 1 out of every 20 households across the country due to non-payment over the last year. That's a significant amount of people. And if you think about that, not having any kind of moratoria on stopping water shutoffs during the COVID crisis and making sure that people have the water needed to even just do simple actions like washing their hands and making sure that they have a sanitary environment at home. This is something that we want to connect Congress to. We want to make sure that water, of course, is for everyone, everywhere, at any time. But more than ever during COVID, that as we look at these emergency packages, these COVID relief opportunities, that really Congress does in fact stop any kind of shutoffs, mandates that there will always be, that there's going to be household reconnections for those that have been disconnected, and that again, people have, especially those with low income, have access to clean drinking water, wastewater, and so forth. All right. So I'm doing a lot, high level, again, you don't have to be an expert on all this. I just kind of want to cruise and give you an idea of those messages. And you might be thinking, well, okay, like what? You're going out there and you're talking to our congressional leaders and you're saying $375 million for GLRI. Well, what does that look like in the past? Are you guys asking for a lot than what's been asked for previously? In most cases, no, it just kind of depends. So to give you an idea, what you're seeing on the screen right now, these funding mechanisms, these are more kind of your environmental based funding mechanisms. So you see Great Lakes Restoration Initiative right there at the top. 375 million is not a huge boost after what we have been looking at previously. And that was my computer dinging. I saw some heads go, oh. There's been some other programs that have fallen underneath other programs. So for instance, you see no detail there. Doesn't mean that it wasn't in the budget. It did exist somewhere. But in terms of kind of our environmental asks, at least for the interior, it's a lot of boosting in some cases. I mean, the Great Lakes Fish and Wildlife Restoration Act, now that was a big one. But otherwise, it's not as though we're asking for huge amounts of money for every single line item, except when it comes to our drinking water needs and our wastewater needs. I want to go back to, we've been doing really good at maintaining those funding levels a lot for our Great Lakes habitat and the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, those kind of things. But just to think about that $188 billion price tag that's needed to fix our drinking water and wastewater infrastructure, if you look at what's been enacted in the past, it's peanuts compared to what we're asking, but we have to get closer and closer to closing the gap when it comes to protecting our communities and making sure that they have clean water. Even sewer stormwater overflow. I mean, you see 28 million versus 40 million to 400 million. We need more money invested. Clean water. Very simple. It continues on here. I mean, again, we've got to keep asking for money when it comes to reducing lead in our water. There are other public service opportunities, these grants that our utilities can use. We're asking for more money there. So this is where the heavy price tags come up. But again, gives you an idea. And again, this column, I should have put the headings there. It's 2019 enacted, 2020 enacted, or excuse me, 2020 enacted, 2021 in the middle, and 2022 ask on your far right. Just again, cruising through these, you know, this is where you're like, well, where's that $15 million coming? Or the $5 million for that Brandon Road study? You know, this is looking at the Asian carp. You know, this is kind of our price tags for the Asian carp. This is the price tags for looking at climate change and trying to model that and looking at coastal resilience altogether. So those are some important studies and some implementations of studies that we're asking for, that we see a tremendous amount of value in there. And some wonderful programs through NOAA. We know that we have great partnerships locally with the Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant, as well as our Lake Michigan Coastal Program. So while it says no detail, these are sub-accounts. These have been in the budget before. And so this isn't a crazy asking for some of these again. And that's what I want to throw that up there, because I think sometimes people, again, they're like, well, are you just asking for millions and millions of dollars for the first time? No, not really. These conversations are ongoing. We feel these price tags, again, pretty reasonable. There's Sea Grant, as I mentioned, and some of the other ones. So just some interesting thoughts about cost, how these programs work. Of course, we need to, you know, we have a big old deficit. It is hard because there's so many of these things that we need. How do you negotiate one over another? Well, we see that this is helping, again, not just the environment, but it's also helping people. So we feel that these are really kind of the killing the two birds with one stone. So with that, that is the quick and dirty messaging as far as what are we saying to those congressional leaders. But I want to actually stop sharing my screen here, whoop, and give an opportunity to hear from some of the people who have went to Great Lakes Day, either right now this week. I know Katie, I think everyone would love to hear an update on how things have been going this week, but then also in the past. And this is kind of where we get more into our discussion, and I hope you'll participate. But Katie, if you want to kick things off with just maybe talk about how are those messages going?
Sure. Thanks. And lovely information. I knew it all, but it's always great to hear it from you. There's always more pizzazz when you say things. So thank you for that. So I'm Katie Hobgood. I'm the program director at Save the Dunes. And as Natalie mentioned, we've been calling it Great Lakes Week this year. So typically it is a one-day event where actually 2 days. We go the first day and we do some training on that day one, and then day two we have meetings all day. So last year there were 6 meetings, and our team kind of split in half and divvied those up. And it's a crazy day running around the hill, but it's a lot of fun. And so of course this year was very different, being virtual, a different kind of hectic, I guess you could say, where we're just trying to organize all the Zoom links and make sure that we're clicking on the right ones when we're supposed to. But overall, it was a great week. We had our last meeting this morning, and we had a lot of really great conversations. A small but mighty team who had a great variety of different stories to share on some of those different topics. So typically how it works is each team member picks one of those things that Natalie just talked about. So of course we're not able to talk about every single thing, but you pick something that speaks to you, that, gets you excited, and you tell a little story about it. So my passion project is the GLRI funding, because I mean, you can see my background, it's amazing. We organize a GLRI project at Save the Dunes right now, where we're improving pollinator habitat. So this is a picture of a NIPSCO right away on the Calumet Trail. I don't know if you can see it there, but our partners at NIPSCO shared the photo, and it's one of my favorites. They're just one of the collaborators on that project. So my message was that this project is highly collaborative. It's benefiting so many different people, places, organizations, from nonprofits to universities to city parks departments to individual landowners. So I was urging them to continue to fund that, and at, of course, that $375 million. So it's really that simple, where each of us is kind of giving our why and then making that ask. So we had a great time this week. A lot of camaraderie amongst our team, I guess. And it was nice that it was spread out a little bit more. There's definitely benefits to being virtual. Of course, I can sign off of the Zoom and then go get back into my pajamas. But I did miss not being in DC, of course. The going to all the different buildings on the Hill was so much fun last year. So this was different, but we made it work, and we were able to speak with about actually the same ratio of actual representatives versus their staff members. So that was kind of interesting. Theoretically, you would think virtually that you might be able to get more time with the actual congressman or senator, but it was actually about the same as it was last year. So that works out. But we got really positive feedback in general. A lot of agreeing with and in favor of what we're saying. Of course, very few promises, because they can't really go that far at this point. But I felt really positive about the next steps portion of this. There was a lot of like, oh, okay, well, let's set up another meeting, or I'm going to be in Northwest Indiana. Why don't we, set up kind of a next step to talk about this issue, kind of thing. So I thought it went really well. I thought last year went really well too, though. So I'm just really excited about this project and enjoy being a part of it. Yeah, that was kind of my take on it. It's been a crazy week. Such a crazy bananas week. Thank you, Nancy, for sticking with me. Not kicking me out all my emails and Zoom links, but we had a lot of fun.
Katie, Nancy, sometimes when you're in that meeting, you get kind of that vibe about one way or another. A senator or representative might be being polled, or kind of just what they're thinking. Any interesting insights that just anybody stick out? Just thoughts on kind of where maybe their passions lie.
Yeah, I met with Senator Todd Young in person last year, and of course this year it was via virtual Zoom. But he's very keyed into the potential Asian carp invasion in Lake Michigan. And I remember when we met last year, just the week before, he had sat down with his children, and they had watched YouTube videos of the Asian carp in the Illinois River and how they were flopping around and jumping in the boats and things like that. And when I came back this year, my passion, of course, is invasive species. So he remembered the pictures that I had shown him last year of the alewives invasion of Lake Michigan back in the 1960s. And he was able to recall, oh yeah, I looked at a bunch of YouTube videos on that, and it's really a bad problem, and we don't want this happening in the Great Lakes. And last year he said that they were going to look into the authorization of funds, but I wasn't really up to date last year, so we weren't to the point of asking for the money yet, because they were still in the planning stage. But I really feel he's going to be an advocate at the table when it comes to appropriating the necessary funds that are going to be required to move into the design aspect of the locks at Brandon Road. and dam there. So that was a pleasant surprise that there was tie over from last year to this year. I didn't get to meet with Senator Braun last year in person because I was assigned to Senator Young. But again, his staff was there and spent a lot of time with us. He dropped in for a while with us, but they took lots of notes. And when I see staff persons taking lots of notes, that means they're listening. And they gave us things they would like us to follow up on, and then they were going to follow up on certain things for us. So I think that that's a positive exchange when you see things like that happening. Plus, he was the one that said, I'm going to be up in Northwest Indiana. Let's set up an appointment so we can get together and continue this conversation that we've started here. And then Congresswoman Jackie Walorski, Natalie, we were together last year in her office, and we found out she's a fisher person and loves to be outdoors. And this year I found out she's also a biker and a hiker and a pollinator interested person. So the more you meet with people like this, you find out they have personal passions about things that are related to the environment. And when you can make that personal connection with them and then with the outdoors, then that's what becomes significant in these personal meetings that we have with them.
You know, Nancy, it's so funny to think back on, I think Todd was in the same meeting with me several years ago when we met with Senator Young, and it was the Asian carp. And I've told this story on numerous accounts.
I remember it.
He just, you know, how quickly can we get them into the lakes was what his take was as we were sitting there. How quickly can we get the Asian carp into the Great Lakes? And it was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We need to back up and have, like, let's reset this. So it's really kind of exciting to hear that, you know, you go back year after year, you carry that message. They remember.
Yeah.
They remember, you leave an impact. Todd, I'd be curious, like Todd, and I see Dan Platt's on here too. Dan's been to Great Lakes Day.
Yeah. Right. Well, hey, on Todd Young, I remember that. I remember, you know, you get it's such a finite, you know, part of your time to explain your pitch and your support for GLRI and the Great Lakes. And I think Nancy's point is critical. You know, I jotted a few pieces down. You know, we have to build connections. And one way that we shouldn't discount that is through passion, right? Whatever your passion might be. And you know, it sounds like Nancy was able to do that with Todd Young with, you know, with the passion, whether that's for water or, you know, as an angler or connection with kids. But I do recall that time, I think that was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, because, you know, the sort of the backstory in my head was, I think he has a degree in agricultural economics, and I think it was well intended. Like some of the side conversations were, how can we turn lemons into lemonade in terms of, you know, taking a challenge, a problem like Asian carp and turning them into either food or energy. The problem is with invasive species is we think we can control these things, and once the genie's out of the bottle, it's out of our hands. So I guess my comments being and by the way, I'm the black sheep here. I'm the badger in Hoosier land. So we had a project a couple years ago at Hobart Marsh in Northwest Indiana. And I think we could still use that project and touring the evolution of that big Army Corps project as an opportunity if we were to get senators and congressmen to visit sites and want to engage and take a look at what the actual, you know, results of this funding and these efforts look like. So I threw that on the table to Natalie and others, you know, a couple of years ago, but I'd throw that back out there. But I guess one last thing, a lot of this is about economics, and you know, we have a lot of firepower in our court in terms of economics, and that is the return on investment. there's the Brookings Institution study that substantiates a 3-to-1 ROI. There's one from Grand Valley State, I think, that supports a 4-to-1 ROI, which essentially means, we might be focused on, like in Katie's background, I think that's, was that swamp milkweed? It's like Asclepias incarnata, I think. So that's the swamp milkweed. We might be focused on all those species, all those native species, but really the currency that senators and congressmen want to see, they want to see jobs, they want to see economic vitality, they want to see, a spotlight on these wonderful open spaces that we love. And that's what we have to, that's the currency that we need to speak of. So I think right now, there's some important legislation on tap that shows that, Marcy Cap from Ohio is really kind of underscoring some of this, that a lot of the focus for DOI has been on Western states, and the Great Lakes restoration has been really, you guys, we've been fighting for sort of scraps on the table. Okay. $300 million sounds like a lot of money, but it surely isn't compared to the, billions that are spent in Western states. And we have the water, we have the jobs, we have the resources here. So it's really up to this, this bipartisan legislation to continue to evolve and then really kind of snowball its successes. So, all right, I'm done, Natalie.
That was awesome, Todd. No, that's it. I'm glad you could share that. It's really important. And it's always one of those things that as we go into these meetings, you look at voting records, you kind of think of your story and you think about just how you're going to change that story to meet the buzzwords and the excitement. You want to hit, if it is jobs, if they're looking at jobs, you're gonna speak more to that. There's just different ways to move the message, or at least the tone of the message, and get the point across. Now, Dan, you've been to Great Lakes Day too. I didn't know, and it's been a while since you've been. I think you were actually wearing your NiSource hat at the time. I didn't know if you wanted to speak to any of your experiences or not. I know I'm kind of calling.
Yeah, I could. No, I'm happy to. The first one I went to was 2009. So I did from 2009 to 2016. I was a super experience every time. I learned so much and made so many friends out there. A couple of the things, big takeaways for me was, especially around GLRI, the bipartisan popularity of that. When we first, some of the early ones that I went to, I still remember having some of the conversations, a lot of the conversations you usually have, at a bar at night, preparing for the next day, or, out in the hall in Congress, talking about it. But I remember it was right in the beginning of the Tea Party movement. And how do you convince people who are self-proclaimed Tea Partiers who don't want to spend money on environment that this is important? So that was really one of the things that was pretty impressive about the coalition, what it put together. A lot of people with very divergent views would come together, and they could agree that protecting the Great Lakes and restoring the Great Lakes was, it kind of defied, political divides and that. So that was one of the big things that I kind of recall, was just, even with people who traditionally don't see eye to eye across the aisle or want to compromise at all, this was one of the things that they seemed to get behind and rally. The last one I went there, and it was kind of like a bomb drop on the whole thing. It was right when the Flint, Michigan water crisis broke out. And it was maybe 2 or 3 days into the crisis when people were realizing that, lots and lots of people were affected with lead poisoning from it. And, the big focus going into the conference was JLRI, but this quick pivot we did to jump on the conscience of of the public and the public outrage that it became that drinking water and state drinking water SRF funding became like the main focus. That was like 2015, I think it was, when that happened. So it's I miss going out with the group. I probably miss going to the Canadian Embassy. They would have a really good shindig for everybody. That pretty much all the partners around the Great Lakes would get together. Tribal, nonprofits. You'd see, the Colonel of the Army Corps there, all the way down to folks who are maybe in college still, just wanting to get involved and advocate for the Great Lakes. And it was really cool to see kind of this mix of different people. So I do miss going to them. When I stepped into my role at the National Park Service, Park Service people don't advocate, we more educate. So it's probably not appropriate for me to go out there now, but it was a cool experience. But kind of wearing my Park Service hat with our natural resource and our resource management program, if it wasn't for GLRI funding, honestly, our program would be dead in the water. We are doing between $1.5 million and $2 million of on the ground restoration a year in the national park. Most of it is very much, thanking Shirley Hines, Save the Dunes, National Parks, MPCA, so many of these different organizations who have worked with us over the years, but Save the Dunes especially kind of helping be kind of the funnel for a lot of these projects. So it sounds like we're like flush with money, $1.5 million, $2 million of restoration on the ground. But it really is just scratching the surface with real needs with invasive species in the park. At any given moment, we're probably only treating 15 to 20% in a best year for invasive species. So that type of work is unfortunately very expensive, very labor intensive. But I very much credit the coalition for continuing that. And the national park wouldn't look as good as it does if it wasn't for that funding.
Thank you, Dan. And before I move on, is there anyone else that's been to a Great Lakes Day that maybe hasn't spoken, that hasn't identified themselves on here? Not that you have to. I know I had kind of thrown out there to see if some of the others wanted to talk. Moving along then, if there's one key takeaway that I want you to have tonight, and something I want to talk about now, is any one of you can do this. You could be on the Indiana team next year. You really could. You could be going with us to DC. I hope it's in person next year. And even if you're not going there in person, there is nothing stopping you from sitting down, from making that quick phone call to a staffer, to jotting out an email saying the Great Lakes matter to me, and here's this list of priorities that we just got over from Save the Dunes that we know this is important. So advocacy is something, and even talking to these congressional leaders is something that so often we put on a pedestal. We think it is something that only these really kind of like smart, savvy people all trust me, I'm neither. Anybody can take these messages and really wearing that passion on your sleeve, that's what's going to drive these messages home. So at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions about doing advocacy. Maybe you're interested in becoming more involved in Great Lakes Day and have some questions about that specifically, or congressional leaders and contacting them. Whatever it may be, you definitely have a lot of experts here, a lot of people with experiences, and we want to hear from you because we want you to also be advocating right alongside us, either in person or from the comforts of your computer at home.
And while people are thinking of a brilliant question to ask, I saw in the chat someone asked about our meeting with Congressman Mervan, and we didn't get an in-person meeting with him. Unfortunately, he was not available this week. So we met with one of his staff members, and she was took diligent notes, and we followed up with a lot of supporting documents. So we're gonna, in the next month or so, really push to hopefully meet him virtually face to face and start building that relationship.
Glad you brought that up, Katie. What kind of questions
There
are,
was a question about what program does beach nourishment fall into? That's one of the questions that's here in the chat.
and there's a few of them. And Paul, I wonder if you know of any specifics of which one that, or Dan, yeah.
So thanks, Natalie. We know of no specific beach nourishment program. There are a variety of programs that beach nourishment could potentially fall under. The resiliency grant, I think, Natalie, did you put that link up
I did
for?
that resiliency one, yeah.
That's like $34 million for the whole nation's coastal program. So we actually competed a little bit for a Great Lakes piece of that a couple years ago. Our challenge here has been it's very tough to compete with the city of Chicago and their needs to make their coast resilient there. I'm trying to bite my lip there because it's a very engineered structural approach that doesn't provide any benefits to the kind of resource we care about. But and then I saw there was a mention of a Homeland Security program that had been shelved before that may come back to life. We've talked to FEMA, we've talked to the Army Corps. As I mentioned to John, I think privately, the nourishment that we did here in Indiana Dunes last year was basically the Portage Lakefront nourishment was all paid for by the National Park Service. It was basically adding money to a dredging contract the Corps was doing, and we had to pay the increment of cost to put that sand on the beach, which was about $9 per cubic yard, in addition to whatever the Corps contract was for dredging. The nourishment that we did at Central Avenue was basically just moving a beach nourishment that the Corps has been doing for years at Crescent Dune, that's 100% federally funded, and we just moved the place where the sand was deposited further west, which was within the scope of the original contract, as a bit of an experiment to see if we could change the sand movement patterns to help nourish some of the beaches even further west and Beverly Shore in the state park.
Paul,
So,
do you with this, with the Biden administration's push for, to back infrastructure and specifically green infrastructure and engineering with nature, do you anticipate being able to access some of that funding for things like beach nourishment, shoreline protection a little easier, or do you think it's going to be, a scrap?
No, we're hopeful that some of this infrastructure investment will benefit us here with nourishment projects. But I will tell you again, and it's weird talking about the size of the sums of these monies, billions of dollars. And whatever they appropriate or make available is typically going to be a fraction of what's actually needed to fix everything that's broken, right? And so infrastructure tends to be thought of more as roads and bridges and not beaches. And so we're in the process of trying to do some education with elected officials to show them the return on investment for a beach nourishment project. And so Natalie talked about a 3-to-1 return on the Great Lakes investment. And in the National Park Service, the return of an investment on national park expenditures is somewhere in the 11 to 20 to 1. And so everybody on this call, if your retirement program was paying 20 to 1, none of you would be on this call. You'd be on your island in the
Right.
Caribbean because you'd be wealthy. And so we are learning in the environmental community how to articulate what we do in economic terms so we can compete for those monies, not just to do, hey, this will be great for recreation. No, the tourism industry in Northwest Indiana is over $1 billion, and the dunes is the #1 destination in the state. And so if we invest in that resource, that product, the return will be good for the economies of all the communities around the
Well, I think that, yeah, that's the name of the game, you know, and I keep, this quote rings in my ears that is, we never seem to have the money to do a project, but we always seem to find the money to do a project. I'm sorry, we never seem to have the money to do a project right, but we always seem to have the money to do the project over again. And I get, you know, I've been called with the high water elevations from 2015 forward, working on big Phragmites projects and stuff. It's amazing the disproportionate funding that seems to go towards frontage roads. And, oh, we have to do something about this. But you're absolutely right about folks aren't making that connection necessarily about, you know, that a lot of these other natural amenities are, you know, helping disproportionately and would be much less expensive to invest in.
No, so to that end, we as environmentalists need to start making the business argument for the kind of work we're doing.
Right.
And we're at the very beginning of that discussion. You know, we're very good at articulating the natural and cultural values of the work we do, but who is making the decisions about where the big money is spent? And those are elected officials, and they are typically listening to the business community. And when we can recruit the business community over to make our ecological arguments because it's good for their business, then we'll see the investment in the kind of projects that we're talking about. It's as simple as that.
Right. If I could make a comment about beach nourishment, I'm recalling last year that $600,000 were available for the state of Indiana from one of the federal government agencies. I can't remember which one it was, but Indiana had to come up with a matching $600,000 in order to claim that. And Senator Karen Talion from our district worked so hard on that. Supposedly they had promised her the money was going to be there. It had been voted upon in the budget by the Senate and the House. And then behind closed doors at the last minute, that matching $600,000 was crossed off. So we lost out on $1,200,000 that we could have had for Northwest Indiana, you know, to actually begin to deal with doing some beach nourishment and seeing what the results would have been from engaging in that sort of a project.
So, yeah, Nancy, I think part of that money was also the continuing discussion that's been going on for decades to provide a non-federal match for the Army Corps to conduct a study that would ultimately lead to folding the nourishment at the Portage Lakefront into a 100% federal project as mitigation for impacts caused by the Port of Indiana. And the failure of being able to find that non-federal match just keeps pushing that federal solution out, 4 years at a time. And, again, the case of politics where Karen, who's trying, she's a Democrat, and everybody else in Indianapolis is a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
What other thoughts are going on out there? Is there anybody thinking that they'd like to join us in the future? Note that we give out scholarships to come with us too. And even though we talk about, these different kind of languages and approaches, we need your help too. I mean, we don't always have to have all the experts. We need the constituents as well.
Natalie, so here the word travel is so close to my heart right now, but yes, I may be interested. I'm not sure if I'm eligible because I am a municipal, elected official, but if I am, I would like to be also considered.
Excellent, Dahlia. Thank you. And that's something. Oh.
Sorry, Natalie. I just dropped a link to the Healing Our Waters Great Lakes Coalition website into the chat. So all of the information that we've covered today, as well as that funding breakdown document that we saw some snapshots of, you can find that on their website if you'd like to take a closer look and kind of get a behind the scenes view of what type of things we're talking to our leaders about. And maybe something will speak to you and get you excited and say, yes, I need to go to DC for a very fun 2-day trip. And this
It's
Canadian
fun.
embassy everyone's talking about, it was very fun.
But maybe, if you don't want to go out to DC, that's fine too. There's no reason that why everyone here can't take a moment to participate in the action alerts that come out from Save the Dunes or some of our partners like Hoosier Environmental Council. It only takes just a second to sign your name, to write that email, to, leave a message and say, I support this or I don't support this. Be sure to act. I mean, if that's going to be one of the big things, just be sure it's really easy to do. And you can't always depend on your neighbor being your voice. You need to be your own voice. And a lot of the times, the people who are against something, they can be the loudest. Let's not make them the loudest in the room. Be positive of why these things matter.
Natalie and Katie, I want to thank you so very much. And if I could just add one thing, I've been told by many senators and representatives at both the state and federal level, if they hear from 5 to 6 people on the same issue, it becomes a red flag item for them. Okay, so that's all it takes is 5 to 6 of us to email them or to call them about a certain bill or a certain issue that we're concerned about. And sometimes some of us feel we're like the voice in the wilderness, but I'll have to say this legislative session for the state of Indiana, what has been so heartwarming is the number of people that have on social media, Facebook or Twitter or whatever, they've said, done, I did it. I told my neighbor about this. I share this. And that's the type of commitment that it takes to move mountains. And it's possible for us to move mountains. It really is. So I have 2 announcements to make. And one of those is a take action item. We always give you at least one take action item at each of our green drinks. And this is regarding Senate Bill SB 389. I am calling it the anti-wetlands bill because honestly, that's what it is. It passed out of the Senate. Right now, it is resting in the House. What would happen next is it would be heard by the Environmental Affairs Committee. So we could potentially stop it there if Representative Doug Gutwein holds no meetings this year. So far, he's held no meetings of the Environmental Affairs Committee in the House, which to me is extremely, I'm not going to say. But anyhow, if we could get him to not hold a meeting or not hold a hearing on that particular bill, then it's going to die. I do know that our Representative Pat Boy is against the bill and she's going to vote no. Representative Jim Pressel, unfortunately, is for the bill and he's actually signed off as being one of the co-sponsors on that. So if he's your Indiana state representative, then you need to contact him immediately and get as many people as you can to contact him. Worst case scenario, let's get this assigned to a study committee, especially since Representative Doug Gutwein has said, All of these environmental bills are so complicated, we did not have the time to look into them deeply nor completely. So let's get it signed to a summer study committee at least, if we can't 100% stop it. So that's your action item. Email, call, include your personal story while you're interested in this, just 2 key points, and then ask, please oppose this, don't vote for it. Next month, green drinks. We've moved to the first Thursday of the month, and we'll usually be there, but sometimes we may not be there depending upon what the program is going to be. But this one is booked and confirmed. It's going to be on night skies. So this should be very exciting because we're moving into warmer weather. We'll be outside, we'll be looking up at the stars. We have an opportunity to learn about night skies and viewing potential from Ken Walzak, and he's the senior manager of Far Horizons at the Adler Planetarium. So I think this is going to be a very exciting program. Also, we're going to have advocates from Beverly Shores. It's my understanding that community has worked on, or they're working on getting declared one of the dark sky communities with a level of certification. And also, we're going to have somebody from Michigan City with us, who was the mover and the shaker for getting Michigan City to actually pass some recommendations in an ordinance, actually, as far as protecting our night skies within the community of Michigan City. So I think it's going to be a very exciting program. So please put that on your calendar, and we look forward to having you join us again.
Thank you all so much. And thank you for all my folks who talked. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thanks.
Bye.